So we really need to understand who they're talking to and what their voice is and what their voice has been historically. So we look through the source documentation, we look through legacy campaigns or things that they had done in the past, and really handpick each team member that's going to work on it for their background in that particular area.
Welcome to the Magnificent Marketing Podcast, where we interview the top marketing experts in the world and keep you up to date on all the changes and best practices to help you grow your business and stay on the cutting edge. Welcome to the show.
Hello, everyone. I'm here with Nancy Hernan, and Nancy has been in the translation industry for nearly 20 years, providing a global voice to clients across several industries. She has worked with major corporations, helping them to roll out new products, engaging in the launch of global websites, overseeing translations for technical content, branding and advertising content, legal contracts and briefs, as well as trade journals. Nancy started G3 Translate after successful careers at TransPerfect Translations and LanguageWorks. Nancy's primary focus over the last 12 years has been on communication in the market research and insights world. To that end, she founded G3 Translate in 2006 with her partner John Labidi to specifically work with market research clients with translation and cultural adaptation needs. G3 Translate has provided assistance with over 12,000 survey translations to clients in over 135 countries over the past 11 years. And today, we are going to talk about tips for correctly translating and speaking to a global audience. Nancy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we spoke right before this, very weird timing because we are in the midst of having a translation challenge ourselves. So the timing for us specifically couldn't have been better, but I know other people are also very interested in this as well because the Internet has made marketing a global opportunity. So very excited to talk to you. And but before we get into all your awesome tips and advice here on how to go about correctly translating, would like to have you first start off by having you speak to the significance of speaking and translating correctly to other countries, and maybe even start out with pointing out some big mistakes that have been made that could have been avoided by other companies and brands.
Sure, definitely. Well, yeah, because we do live in a global culture, it's really important to make sure that you're getting the right voice when you're talking to people in other places, other countries, other markets in general. There have been a few really big snafus in the past that I think I'll highlight here just to show a little where people need to do their research and make sure that they're addressing the people in a proper way. So Coors, they're an American beer maker. I think we've all heard of Coors. They wanted to start selling their beer in Spain. And they had at the time this lovely campaign that worked very well here called Turn It Loose. The problem was when you translate that tagline directly into Spanish, especially apparently in Spain, it tells the person they're going to be suffering from diarrhea. So I think, yeah, I don't think you want to buy some beer and end up spending the night in the bathroom. So yeah, they didn't do their due diligence there when checking that out. And another one, not so much a translation error, but an imagery problem. Pampers was looking, Procter & Gamble wanted to sell in Japan. And so on their packaging at the time, they had an image of a stork delivering a baby. And, in the U.S., we all hear about the stork when we're little. Before we learn about the birds and the bees, we know the stork brings the baby to the house and, everything's great. In Japan, they were like, why, why is this bird carrying the baby off? Like they were very confused.
Yeah.
They were concerned, like, hey, because there it's a giant floating peach that brings babies. Giant floating peaches bring the babies to their parents. So the imagery was just completely off. And so they learned very quickly that, it doesn't work well.
That's hilarious. We actually do a fun little marketing faux pas Friday, and we use that one of the stork. And they said they were scaring children from being taken away by this big bird. So
exactly.
we saw that one. That's hilarious you point that out. That's awesome. Do you have any other fun examples to share or to kind of just point out like, hey, these big brands are making these mistakes, so understand that it's very, very easy to do.
There are so many of them. Yeah, it's crazy. Well, Clairol, which is, you know, a big thing here, they sell curling irons. And they sold a curling iron in Germany called a mist stick. That was what it was called in the U.S. They didn't bother to change it. They figured Germans speak enough English. Well, mist in German means horse manure.
Oh, gosh.
So, yeah, you don't want that in your hair.
No.
You know, you just
unless
you're
going for dreadlocks, but yeah.
Right, exactly, yeah. And Mercedes-Benz used to call themselves Benzie. It was like their little nickname. But in Chinese, the word Benzi is like rushing to die, rushing towards death.
Oh, my goodness.
So, you know, little things that, you know, we take for granted, not good. Not good.
And that's hilarious because those are like big mistakes. Like you have a car that's going to drive you to death. You have a beer that's going to give you diarrhea. You have a bird that's going to not only make you feel good about your baby, you fear somebody's going to take them away. So
exactly.
I mean, like these are the ones that are like just absolutely the opposite of what you want to say, let alone like a small translation issue. So
right.
yeah, those are hilarious examples. And if other ones pop in your brain that you want to point out as we go along, feel free because they're just entertaining to hear, if nothing else. Let alone driving home the importance of it. So
exactly.
You've obviously, I think you've hit the nail on the head with just showing those few examples of the importance here, and also not just the importance. We all know that it's important, but the importance of really understanding that easy mistakes could be made, you know, and you need to stop and you need to make sure that you think it through or you go through the proper measures to ensure you don't make these mistakes. Because again, we're talking, you know, the examples you pointed out were from brands that have, you know, tens and millions, if not hundreds of millions of marketing budget. And they're making these mistakes. So obviously, if you're an e-commerce account that wants to go into another market, you're very, very, you're very apt to make a mistake if you don't think it through. So, would like for you walk us through from beginning to end on how you make sure you're correctly translating and speaking to other nationalities and languages.
Definitely. Yeah. Well, the first thing we do, anytime a client walks in our door, we take a really good, long, hard look at their source documentation and who they're talking to. Who we question, you know, who's your audience? What's their age? What are you looking to get out of this? A lot of what we do, as you had mentioned before, is in the market research space. So it is, you know, new stuff coming to new markets or rebranding some things to make them like new. And so we really need to understand who they're talking to and what their voice is and what their voice has been historically. So we look through the source documentation, we look through legacy campaigns or things that they had done in the past and really handpick each team member that's going to work on it for their background in that particular area. Like if there's a pharmaceutical company and they're talking to doctors about a new drug that they're working on and side effects and what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, we want our translators to understand, you know, what this product is, what it does, and how to speak to the doctors in a meaningful way so they can really understand what they're looking to accomplish with this new drug, for example. And so we take those teams, and what we do is we build it out as a translator, an editor, and a proofreader. Because we find that people are human, they make mistakes. We're not machines. Machine translation, as wonderful as it sounds in theory and as great as it is to go on Google Translate and play around, it's still not really what you want your brand to be when you're facing an audience that you're trying to get money from, essentially. So we do the three-step process with one person doing all the translations. Usually we'll have that person be in market. If the product is going to Germany, then our translator is going to be in Germany. And he's going to take the source documentation with all of our, you know, checklist of the questions we ask the client, what they're looking for, and so on and so forth, and translate that. And then once he's translated it, we bring it back to an expat who's living in an English-speaking country, normally, because we are a U.S. Translation company, most of our clients reside in the U.S. They've written the source materials here in the U.S. Originally. So we take a German who's lived here for maybe like 5, 6, 7 years, could be a little bit longer, but long enough that they're acculturated, that they understand the U.S. culture. So when they're looking at that English source against that German translation, they want to make sure that that guy in Germany really understood what the American writer is trying to say to that German audience. Because you're a German guy sitting in Germany translating into German from an English document, but maybe you only ever spent a year of your life in the United States, so you might not understand the culture, the kind of meaning between the lines. Because, you know, there's always some kind of inferred meaning there in what we say. It's a tone, it's a style, and it definitely has a cultural tinge to it. So it's important that our editor here in the U.S., while they're German, they understand the American mindset and understand what that author was trying to say. And then he'll go back to the person in Germany, and they'll work together to massage that text to make sure that it's true to the meaning, but also culturally relevant to the audience in Germany.
Understand, yeah. So you go one way, then you go back the other way. Understood.
Yeah, exactly. So they kind of back and forth between each other, trying to figure out how to say it in the best way without losing some of that punch that they're looking for, that the writer is looking for when they're composing. And then once they're done and they've signed off, we just for good measure do a proofreading to check it and make sure it's close, you know. Another person, another translator, some language professional will look that over and just read it for flow. And they're really just making sure that everything is there, all the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed. Literally, they shouldn't be changing more than a period or a comma or a semicolon, because the language should be set, but it's just that extra check to make us feel safe that it's published worthy.
Gotcha.
And we kind of stop at 3, because we feel too many people looking at it are going to be too many changes.
Gotcha. Now, are there any like pointers you have for, you know, just in general in and around this, as far as like writing simple and short sentences, or, you know, possibly avoiding, you know, unnecessary words, or, you know, consistent terminologies, just in general? Is there any like specific things that you are on the lookout for that, you know, you've over the years that you've learned that, hey, yeah, we got to really pay attention to this, and that? Or maybe there's 20 things, maybe there's 2, I don't know.
Oh yeah, well, you know, it really kind of depends on who you're talking to, because, you know, in the U.S. we do write in short, clipped sentences. That's just the way we write. That's our style. But in Germany, I have literally seen a book where the sentence went on for 3 pages. One sentence.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. It was a very difficult book to read. But, you know, they can do that, and it's acceptable. So it really does, as far as a broad tip goes, it's hard. I guess just paying attention to slang or humor, because what I think is funny, you probably are not going to find funny. And that carries across borders as well, like imagery, pictures, colors, depending on who you're talking to, can mean very, very different things. So I think working together with a partner who understands your market is the most important thing, because making something fit on a global scale is definitely not always easy, and yeah, it can be very, very bland at times, depending on, again, what your product is, what you're marketing towards. But it can also be a lot of fun and very funny to carry across the different slangs and the different senses of humor, and working to really make your audience in that particular market demographic feel that you're talking to them. And I think, you know, overall, in my opinion, I think that, to me, is the most important, is making someone feel like it was written just for them. Because in today's world, there are so many thousands and thousands of voices screaming at you, buy me, do this, go here. You're going to gravitate towards the one who really you feel understands you. And really honing in on who it is instead of trying to be too general, I think is really more important nowadays. That's just my opinion, but
no,
that's kind of what we do. So.
No, I hear you. Now, where do you see like some of the most common mistakes being made? And let's, like, maybe it's for, you know, this could be for the person that's not going to necessarily go through a translation company, like say they can speak Spanish or they can speak Mandarin, and they're hired for a company to do this, you know, to place these ads, to do that, you know, in other countries. Where do you see some of the most common mistakes being made? You know, when I was preparing for this, you know, I looked up some stuff and I saw, you know, some pointers about, you know, limiting your pronouns, you know, be careful about phone numbers, potentially using an active voice versus a passive voice, you know, stuff like that. Like, so for people who can potentially give this a go on their own because they know the language, but they might not know the strategy and the, you know, things to kind of be aware of. Can you point out some of the top, so for those people, can you point out some of the top, you know, some of the top items that you all are on the lookout, like some of those things I previously mentioned, in addition to, like, another one I read was avoid invisible plurals and, you know, stuff like that. So, or, you know, the amount of space that you want to leave, you know, for the original text and all of that kind of stuff. So can you point out some of the things that you all look out for in general, some of the hot ones?
Sure. Well, to be perfectly honest, if you're not a native speaker of the language, you should never be translating into it. So if you studied French in high school, I wouldn't think you should be translating French for a company. That we've seen that happen and seen it go wrong with clients of ours in the past. So you should always work into your native tongue, and even if you feel very, very confident, there's still so much room for error that it's important that what you're doing is in your native tongue. And again, like for voice, you had mentioned voice, like the passive voice, active voice. Well, if you're translating, if you're a German translator, you know that you're not going to translate into a passive voice because it just sounds weird. But if you are a Chinese person, you will always probably use the passive voice because that's most common. But as far as tips and tricks for translating, I honestly am not the best translator in the world because I will go through 10,000 words and still not be satisfied with what I land on. So I guess, you know, taking into account that you can't take 10 years to translate one document is probably important to those who are trying to do it on their own. The average, I would say, if they're translating something and they want to know how they kind of stack up against the competition, I think the average translator does a couple thousand words a day minimum. With some of the best translators I've met, literally going 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 words in a day, but that's incredibly fast. Using tools is important. If you're translating for a company, you have a job as an internal resource to do their campaigns, you really need to invest in a good translation tool. That translation tool isn't necessarily a machine. It's not like Google or something like that, but rather a computer-aided translation. We call them CAT tools, and they are used to help not only maintain consistency across your projects because it stores in a repository everything that you've ever translated, so you can go and find it over and over again and apply it to new campaigns as they come out. But it also does a lot of checks, like if you're working in HTML files, it'll check the codes and make sure that everything is correct and not broken. It'll propagate in your previous text and to help you with the spell checking and the grammar checking and things like that. So having a really good solid tool is important if you're translating. And also, it's not just about the words. What you're doing is much bigger than just words. What does your brochure look like? What colors are in your brochure? Are those okay for your audience? Like, is it okay to have women in bathing suits for the UAE? Probably not. So looking at the imagery and suggesting changes and making those changes is important. Looking at numbers, and things like that. You had mentioned something about phone numbers, not just phone numbers and addresses, but if your product has a number in it. For example, if it's something big 4, like chewing gum or whatever, well, that's not going to do well in China because 4 is a really, really unlucky number, and they just don't want to see it. So at that point, you need to go to your boss and say, listen, this name just doesn't work. They're going to think it's unlucky, and nobody's going to want to chew it because they'll think their teeth are going to fall out or something like that. But yeah, so looking at the whole package rather than just the word by word. I think a lot of translators make that mistake of just getting into the, new translators, I should say, not seasoned, just verbatim translating the words without really thinking through the end meaning and really understanding what you're trying to accomplish with this text, because you're really a writer. You're not just a dictionary. And I think, it's important to identify with that creative side.
No, I hear you, and it really sounds like there's so many intricacies here that, and you're not like pushing your services at all, but you are really pointing out that, hey, you really need to know this stuff. There's so many things that could go wrong, and just kind of knowing the language a little bit could be a little scary or a little risky if you're just going to go with that. And because there's so many nuances. You mentioned one company wants a passive voice, one company wants an active voice. So at the very least, I think we're showing people all the nuances here, and to really be careful. And if you are going global, you probably do have a bigger opportunity. So it might be worth taking the time, allocating some of your budget to making sure that this part is correct, because those other campaigns probably cost those companies millions of dollars, and to stop and do it the right way is very important. Now, you did mention a tool to use. Can you touch on that, as well as any other potential opportunities for people who are further along, with possibly having a native translator, native speaker on staff, and they just maybe need some help there? What were those tools? What was that tool you mentioned, and anything else out there that could be helpful?
Sure. Well, they're called CAT tools. That's just the general description of what they are, computer-aided translation tools. And there are a whole lot of them on the market. We currently use and highly recommend one called MemSource, and then there's another called MemSource, MEMSOURCE. Okay. And there's another one called MEMOQ, MEMOQ. And then there's SDL Trados, which has been around for years and years and years, and they're also a super solid tool. So there are so many more out there. Those are just the 3 that we use on the most regular basis for our clients.
And what do those
tools do? And they all have their pluses. They basically help us to extract translatable content from files, because what we are working on is predominantly market research. A lot of it's web-based, and they are HTML files or XML files or, different kind of coded files, where the content can be surrounded by different kinds of tags. So they help us to extract that content out in a clean way so we can really see what the words are while translating. And it also helps us to maintain consistency by seeing what's repetitive, automatically propagating in that repetitive text once we've translated it the first time and hit enter, so that it saves time, it saves money, it saves costs. So our clients can come to us a year from now and say, hey, I want to rerun this survey. I've only changed 2 questions. Can you send me apply that with your CAT tool, apply all of the old translations in and just do the new ones. And it saves them time and money, and of course we do that. So it's basically to help the workflow, help consistency, and make sure the language it does the grammar and spelling checks and things like that as well. Just a little tool, like better than Word.
Gotcha. No, gotcha. Very cool. Now, did you touch on all the tools? Did you touch on two or all three?
There are 3 tools. They all do pretty much the same thing. Then we have other tools. Yeah, they have pluses and minuses. Some work better with one particular file format. Some work better with another. The display could be a little bit different depending on what style you like, how it looks on your monitor as you're typing. So I think anyone who is seriously interested in CAT tools needs to just do trial versions of all and test them out, because they really are all very, very solid and highly recommended.
Very cool. Now, you mentioned a little bit ago, and I appreciate you giving everybody those pointers, that, this could get fun because you do want to potentially be humorous, but I do also know the usages of slang or humor could go terribly wrong. What insight can you provide here?
With the humor?
With potentially use of slang or humor, yeah.
Yes. Well, it's funny. Almost anything can be translated, but it doesn't mean it's going to be translated well. So I think with humor, you really have to just go with it and rewrite for your audience. There are so many different types of slang and so many ways to communicate that you just have to be open-minded and not too stiff with your text. If you're the writer, you wrote the content in English and it's all your style, you, as a client, that you want to see that brought across to Japan or Germany or China or Korea, but you need to let your translators have that creative license to make sure that it's going to work for them and not be too strict. I think sometimes we get caught up in our own heads and really love what we've done and don't want to let go of the reins. And when you're translating something, in particular slang or something funny, you really have to trust and believe in your translator and let them go and give them free rein to bring it to life and not just try to force them into the box that is your particular humor, because it definitely won't work.
Yeah, that seems like scary to me. That seems like something that you better go through a proper translation company, because I can just, you see shows all the time when just an American person's married to like a British person and the humor doesn't translate, and those are like native, English language speakers, each of them. So, you see that, so I only can imagine how difficult that could be for other countries and not understanding what they might find funny or not. So,
yeah, exactly.
I would just say biggest pointer on that is be very, very, very careful unless you're going through a proper translation company on slang or humor. Now, moving on to visuals, graphics. Anything specific that we should be paying attention to here?
Well, graphics, colors, imagery needs to be checked for your target. Something that has a bold colors, lots of action, it might really speak to a buyer in Mexico where, like the Day of the Dead. Imagine, I don't know if you've seen that new Disney movie, Coco, but I have a 4-year-old and I've seen it, and it was beautiful. It was so colorful. It was so filled with just these pretty things. But maybe somebody in Denmark who's a little more sensible and a little more sedate might not be moved by that quite as much. So looking at, the style of the culture that you're talking to is important. And again, like here, if you're selling coffins, you're going to you have all your people very sedately dressed in black, right? But in China, all of your people are going to be wearing white because that is the color of mourning. So you're just looking at your audience with those graphics and making sure they really match. As I mentioned before, you don't want to have half-naked women on the beach for Kuwait. It's just not going to, for your suntan lotion. Or there was someone who recently was talking about shaving And you know, how are you going to sell razors to a man who never shaves? You know, and it's you have to really, does my product work? Can I communicate to them in a way that is meaningful, or should I look somewhere else? I think a lot of times you want to push into a new market, but you need to do your due diligence and do your research before you do that, before you make that push, because you could be wasting millions and millions of dollars on something that's just not going to work. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where not just the translation company, but also the research companies come in, and we build, like we work with them on these surveys to find out, can you even sell this here? Is anyone going to buy it? If there's no point, why would, you know, KFC spend, you know, $50 million trying to push into a vegetarian market?
Yeah.
I mean,
sense, right? Man, it sounds like there's so much more to just knowing languages here. I mean, you really need to know cultures. And then the same thing goes with like hand gestures, you know, common to us, hand gestures can go awry, really awry. I don't know how many times I've seen things that mean F you, you know, that are like thumbs up, or I think one's even a peace sign if I remember my memory serves correctly. That means like F you in some sort of in a country. So same thing there, right? With visual graphics, same thing with hand gestures. You really need to understand the culture, and that you're not necessarily going to get that from just translating directly, you know, from, you know, words, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, like you said, the flipping the peace sign the other way to a Brit is like it is F you. And I once learned in a meeting, to my horror, that showing the bottoms of your feet to an Egyptian is basically like showing him your middle finger.
What?
I was told, oh, the sheikh is going to walk in the room. You need to put both your feet on the ground, please. And I'm like, excuse me? You know, I had my legs crossed like a lady and my one foot bobbing a little bit so you could kind of see the sole of my shoe. And I was informed by my handler that, that is basically a very lewd gesture in his culture. And
talk about like stepping on a landmine on accident. I mean,
exactly.
I think what we're really getting out of this is, you know, it'd be one thing for you to come on this podcast and be able to educate everybody from the, what was it, 335 countries, and that would take us all year round to do. And a lot of times I like to, you know, give people actionable stuff to go home with, and you did give some great tools, but I think more than anything, you really gave some insight that there's a lot to this. There's the writing, there's the slang, there's the active voice, passive voice. There's visuals you need to pay attention to. There's hand gestures that you need to be wary of potentially using. There's just so much that goes into understanding. This isn't about translation. It's about understanding a culture. And unless you really, really, really understand that culture, you're playing with fire, and watch out. And you know, if you are going globally, and which means you most likely have a budget to do so, take some of that budget, take some of your initial ad spend, and put it up front, and make sure all your creative, all your writing, all of that is correct, because you could just be wasting so much money either by not knowing it or potentially getting a big backlash. So I think that's really what I'm getting out of this, and it's very enlightening, because I didn't really, you know, before getting into this, really take into consider everything. I was just saying, hey, make sure the words are translated correctly, right? But no, there's so much more. And to kind of just tie everything up here, you did mention about checking your work, how you all do it, how you go across, you know, to the native, they send it back, they do it, and then they make sure the tone and everything is correct with somebody who understands English, and then you go back with the proofreading. Is there anything else that you suggest to make sure everything is airtight? Like does that native speaker, do they take into consideration the visual graphics, the hand gestures, everything? What are some of the measures that you all put in place to make sure everything is completely airtight before you push go or push send?
While we look at, we have a whole checklist actually internally that looks through different aspects, like are the graphics okay? Does it look okay? Does it read well on screen? Is it fluid? Is it natural language? Have they re-alphabetized the list according to the translations? And can we re-alphabetize the list? Because a lot of times in our surveys, you know, they'll have like an alphabetical list of cities or states or products. Does that product exist in that market? You know, that's all things that our translators will look for before they push send. But mostly it's are all the words there? Do they match up? Does it sound okay? Have I checked the spelling? You know, it's just like any person in the publishing world before they print that book. They're just going to go over it with a fine-tooth comb and make sure that it's all present, the ideas are all clear, and everything is conveyed in a way that can be read by the target demographic.
Understood. And is that proprietary checklist that you all have, I'd assume?
Yeah.
Or is that okay?
Yeah, we've developed it over the years with our particular type of translation, because you know it is very specific what we do with the insights in marketing research, looking at that marketing world in a very particular way.
Gotcha.
But
all
I do
right.
have
Well,
one more tip for you.
Oh, please.
I'm going to give one little plug to this book that I happened to come across years ago, and honestly, I think it's the best thing for people looking to do international business. To buy the book, get a look at it. There are actually a couple different volumes, and I'm not sure if it's been republished, but I got it like about 10 years ago. But I love it. It's called Kiss, Bow, or Shake Hands. And the authors are Terry Morrison and Wayne Conaway. And it basically gives you cultural overviews, tips about doing business, negotiation strategies, all the little things. Don't show your feet. Nodding your head in Bulgarian means no, and shaking it means yes. You know, all these little things are in this book with the gestures, how to talk to people, the forms of address, and, you know, even they talk about cognitive styles of the culture. I mean, it's a great book, and I think it could benefit your listeners who are looking at doing business internationally.
Oh, well, thanks for that tip. I'm sure that's going to be really helpful for somebody who is getting into a new market, and specifically if you're going to be meeting with people too. Make sure you get all that right. But yeah, well, hey, this has been very enlightening. I even after my research, I still, before talking today, I just really brought some awareness, like how many mistakes could be made, how many things to pay attention to, and you can't really just kind of wing this by doing a Google search. So, really appreciate your tips and advice and your insight and your time today. How can people continue to learn from you, Nancy?
Well, they can give us a shout. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. So, and there's j3translate.com. Just pop me an email, and I'd be happy to talk about cultural aspects of translation or communicating on a global scale with anyone, anytime.
Gotcha. And that's j3translate.com, correct? And you say on Twitter, but the Twitter handle is @Nancy_G3, correct?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Nancy, I really appreciate your time and everything today. And until next time.
Thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thank you for listening to the latest podcast. Feel free to go to magnificent.com/blog to see the show notes for this interview, as well as those from many other of the world's top marketing experts. Have a great day.